Hi everyone! Just a brief note to let you know that we have launched a brand new podcast called Talks at Climind to interview top minds in the field of climate change to discuss on data solutions in climate mitigation, adaptation, and climate finance. Listen to our podcast to hear more from the world's leading experts from academia institute and organizations. From Climind, a team of researchers and entrepreneurs based in Cambridge, Hong Kong, and London. It's Talks at Climind, a show about the big ideas about climate change, data science, and innovation. Welcome back. This is the second part of our conversation with Priya and Ronnie, the topic of machine learning with climate change and then manage. So moving on to that, we know recently the news coming out from OpenAI really got everyone's attention on this ChatGPT. So before this episode, we actually asked the ChatGPT to read about Priya's work and then give us some questions like it wants us. So I'm just gonna read out some questions, but I want to hear from Priya, like what's your perspective, like from computer scientist perspective on those questions. So ChatGPT, this is question 1. After reading your website, it asks, your research often focuses on the intersection of machine learning and climate change. How do you see the machine learning being used to help combat climate change? And then it also asks a question like, you co-founded the climate change AI organization to help facilitate collaboration between machine learning and then climate science community. And how have you seen the organization impact so far? So I will stop reading here, but it's actually I would say it's a quite well-assembled question list, but want to seek for Priya's your view. Like, how do you think these questions are?
Yeah, so I think what's really interesting, so ChatGPT and a lot of these other generative models, they're very good at, I think, kind of mimicking style. So you can imagine podcast-related questions. They're often a bit high level, a bit forward-looking. What are the biggest challenges? How have things been going? And I think ChatGPT did a good job on that, as well as kind of identifying some of the higher level themes of my work. So the fact that I am a co-founder of Climate Change AI, focus on machine learning and climate change. At the same time, right, it's not necessarily accurate all the time. So looking at the set of questions here, there's a different question that, for example, asks about my paper on deep learning for climate pattern recognition, which is actually not a paper I've written at all. And it's sort of basically pattern matching and going, oh, Priya's done deep learning, Priya's done climate. Let's kind of create the name of a paper that Priya has written. And so I think in general with these things, it's my Ph.D. advisor, Zico Coulter, actually put it very well in a Twitter thread, just basically saying generative models are very good in a setting where something is hard to create, but very easy to verify. And if those conditions aren't met, so if it's, for example, if I search for something and I get an answer back and I have no way of personally knowing if that answer is true or not, that makes it very hard to verify. I have to go ahead and Google the thing myself anyway and check into the sources. And then it sort of, you lost the utility of the use case. Where something like this, where, Karen can maybe writing questions is really difficult, but then given a set of questions, Karen can go, okay, that one's good, that one's not, this one I can tweak, and really use it as a kind of start to your own process. I think these are places where generative models potentially make sense.
Yeah, so just based on that, like, we've been curious about this question for long. So what do you think is the reason, assuming we can generate the reference of the results, like from the large model, assuming it's possible. So what's your view? Like, is it possible to have a domain-specific search engine, like based on the ability of the big language model we have today? So make it like better than, I guess, like a Google or other search engines we have.
Yeah, it's a great question. I guess I would say that this question of domain-specific search is a little bit orthogonal to this question of generative models and large language models. So with kind of Google search as it stands today, we could, right, come up with search algorithms that are better tuned for a specific domain that allow you to search through the information in a more granular way for your domain. Separately, people have been thinking about, can we train, large language models and generative models like ChatGPT on a more specific set of data? So for example, you have the base model and you train it additionally on power systems data. So it has, or power systems related literature. So it has more of a notion of power systems. These are both ways that one can envision kind of improving the search for power systems related information. But in some sense, it doesn't have to do with like generative models or ChatGPT itself. It just has to do with the fact that, do we care enough to, be it the old way or the new way, really make sure to embed domain specific knowledge and domain specific data and domain specific guardrails, right? Knowing what can go wrong in the answers of these things and how do we correct for them. A lot of this is domain specific knowledge. So I think I am not personally convinced that ChatGPT and these kinds of models provide a good solution for search at the moment. And so as a result, not necessarily for domain specific search either. But I think the prospect of having domain-specific search is really exciting and can be done in a couple of different ways. And it really comes down to whatever way you kind of pursue it, including through original search, really having that notion of embedding domain-specific knowledge and kind of being informed more so by sources from the domain that you would like to actually search through.
Yeah, and I think like just as you emphasize, like to have human opinion in the loop of improving all these sorts of new development of AI technology is still a thing like needs a lot of efforts to work on. And then I think the same question to Ronnie on this. Like, what's your takeaways on the ChatGPT and the large language models? Like, as you've been interviewing so many entrepreneurs, especially in this area.
I think Priya covered it pretty well. So it's very good for some use cases, but not good for everything. Or to quote from the Le Quinn Yan, one of the pioneers in the deep learning space, that it's more of a writing aid for now. For many use cases, I mean, it's best to use it as that, but it's in many use cases just like a high-tech plagiarism, to put it bluntly. So I tried to, for example, one of my personal experiment with ChatGPT was to ask the bot to write me a paper, see how to become like good in quantitative investing, and it does give me like very good, like high level and with some kind of details of a article. But when you look through everything, you find that there are something that doesn't what Priya just said, like you cannot just verify it, and you cannot find the source to be able to trust the content that's been generated by this kind of bot. So to summary, the use case has to be very specific and accurate for us to use that. But for now, it's limited to a very, very specific use cases, such as writing aid.
Yeah, and if I can jump in too, I think, Karen, because your previous question had been like, if it generated references, would this still be okay? And I think the idea is when it's not a matter of just like, oh, okay, great. If it just like put a citation next to what it got, that it would be fine. Because fundamentally, there are a lot of these questions relate, is it synthesizing the information properly? Is it making things up, right? I mean, even in the set of questions to me, it made up a paper I had written. And in general, these models, it's not just like plagiarism in the sense that they kind of replicate what they see. They also, when given a question that they don't know the answer to, try to extrapolate from the information that they have. And the way in which they extrapolate is very different than the way in which a human extrapolates, and as a result leads to, I mean, first of all, when any of us try to extrapolate from our own knowledge, it may not be correct, but the model is not necessarily cognizant of that, right? To a model that is getting some input and producing some output, the model doesn't necessarily know, am I interpolating or extrapolating compared to the data that I have? And the model isn't good at kind of expressing uncertainty, explaining its answers or why it might have gotten something wrong. So a lot of those aspects, I think, are not just small tweaks. They are really fundamental challenges that need to be ironed out in these technologies.
Yeah, so just final question based on the ChatGPT thing. I really like the way both of you frame it, like the fundamental difference how these models are creating answers that you might not necessarily like to think about the question is. And I think this is more art way, like sometimes asking a good question is more important than finding the answers. So I think the final thing, wanted to hear your comments on like what you think is the biggest breakthrough, like technology or new items coming out like ChatGPT can bring compared with the traditional machine learning world?
Yeah, like I said, I think I'm generally skeptical of the use of these kinds of models and whether they will truly bring breakthroughs in climate change related workflows. I think to me, in terms of how can these models help with climate change related workflows or other things, it feels a little bit more like the ways in which Microsoft Word and Excel have enabled things, right? You like having access to good word processing and good spreadsheets and good tools to then enable us to do things that are intelligent as humans on top of those tools is where I see ChatGPT and these kinds of tools really coming into play, as Ronnie said, right? Like a writing aid or various things like that, like spell check, right? There are all of these things that sort of have helped us to increase our productivity as humans in various ways without necessarily replacing human ingenuity. And I do see that this is where these kinds of tools really come in. But there are other things that I'm very excited by, right? So things like I think there have been various innovations in deep reinforcement learning and physics-informed also machine learning that can have really cool implications for the way that we pursue different problems. So for example, DeepMind's AlphaFold was very awesome in terms of using data-driven approaches to really accelerate our ability to understand protein folding in that particular case. And that use case comes up in a lot of places where you can do things like when you're trying to synthesize the next battery, analyze the outcomes of past experiments and predict which batteries you should synthesize next. And there are, I think, lots of things like this that are particularly exciting to me, this interface of machine learning and science and engineering and how we can combine knowledge bases from both of these things to accelerate our ability to make progress in those areas.
Yeah, I just want to echo on this topic Priya mentioned about the productivity and how we utilize the new technologies. So, for example, in back to climate change topic, we were having this conversation with one of the co-chair of IPCC, and then the professor described to us how the report actually was put up together, and then with the growth of information coming out in climate change world is like exponentially every year. And then now the report is it has to be reviewed and then be commented by researchers at hundreds and thousands line by line. So the sort of efficiency or ability to process information definitely will be good to have a tool to accelerate that. But I think the gatekeeper, the eventual, we still need the expert in the loop to give the answers and direction where it should be going. Yeah, so based on that, I think like both our co-hosts today and then Priya are involved a lot with education, community work, which is a really important part of, especially for climate, when we're talking about the next generations and generation after's life. So I want to hear from both of your opinions, like how we can improve the communication between academic and then technology implementation through the work you do, and how would you improve it based on what we already have today?
So yeah, what I was going to say is I think that right now, often the academics and those who are doing technology implementation are not part of the same communities or even in the same rooms. So and they're often thinking about very different things. Academics are definitely thinking about how to kind of improve the fundamentals, and then implementers are often, okay, how do I take this, scale this, and things like this. And I think a lot of stuff gets lost in translation because, for example, I mean, tying this back to our conversation about ChatGPT, you had a bunch of researchers working on this in a way that was, very cognizant of the not just potential, but also limitations of these technologies and things like that. And in this case, the communication from researchers to practitioners was the launch of, ChatGPT as a tool that people could really play with. But in doing that, and I think the publicity around it, a lot of the potential got communicated, but not the limitations. And it means that a lot of the use cases that are being thought about in industry range from potentially not good use cases to honestly, some of them potentially very harmful. And so I think this question of how do you kind of both get people in the same room or able to communicate able to really understand each other's developments and motivations, but how do you appropriately communicate about the potential alongside the limitations and consequences, where we don't think of this second set of things as, less important, but it's really a core part of the conversation and making sure that we move forward in an impact-oriented way. I think there's a lot that can be done there. And I think that, communities like, there are many communities that like Climate Change AI and Breakthrough and Climind, like many groups that are trying to convene these kinds of conversations. But I think at the forefront, right, like true science-informed discourse rather than hype has to be at the center.
I just want to add one very specific example where I think where we can have a lot of impact if we, push the effort a little bit more, which is some academic program, especially partnership collaboration between, research institutes and the industry. And there's a role for every stakeholder to play in not only the companies, the universities, but also the policymakers who give out the grants to universities. And just to give you one example, I've seen a lot of places where, PhD student or the researcher doesn't have the data they need to train the models. But on the other hand, in companies, they use very decade-old model, but with very good data. And that there's just that gap that can be matched and can be closed to create a lot of synergy. And there are a lot of ways to do that. For example, the company can step a bit closer, the researcher can step a bit closer, but also there can be a lot of incentives that's created by, for example, the government grants, which is probably the most source of research grants anywhere in the world, to incentivize such kind of similar to PPP collaboration, and that will give a huge boost to how we close the gap between the technology implementation and the actual academia.
Thank you both for mentioning those. And then not advertising, but I'm actually right now also doing more climate finance research at Imperial. One of the things motivated me initially joining the school here is implementation, also the role finance world is playing in this climate sector. No country has the amount of budget to solve climate issue alone, neither company. And how we allocate the society's resource, I think not just for scientists to find optimized ways on that, but also like how we can persuade policy to go in a way that's more intelligent or fitted into the like facts can be proved by scientific research, and then like in the between how private sector are motivated to join that, and I think like it's fascinating, like because we initially when we find out about climate change AI being different from other community, so we realized there are grants new coming out to help researchers to do research, and you also have like happy hour online, and then we also have summer school, and of course the famous paper I think published in 2019, a topic of tackling climate change with machine learning mapped out the areas how you can use certain like technology sectors research into different areas. So what was the background story of climate change AI, how it was started, and then how it has been so far?
Yeah, so climate change AI, it's sort of the root started back in 2018 when a bunch of people came together. So one of my co-founders, David Rolnick, was working in machine learning and was starting to convene people from the machine learning community to try to ask this question of how can we employ machine learning for climate action, just given the urgency of this issue today. And then, I had been working in the machine learning and power systems space for a couple of years at that point, with the intention of helping to better integrate renewables. And, had been involved in communities like the Computational Sustainability Network that were bringing together computer scientists to try to work on sustainability related problems. And then my third co-founder, Lynn Koch, she was a climate policy researcher who was starting to see a large amount of kind of satellite imagery, remote sensing data becoming available, and was seeing the potential of that to fill gaps in the information we have when forming public policy. And so a couple of these threads came together. We came together and kind of wrote this paper, Tackling Climate Change with Machine Learning, over the course of 6 months. And we kind of surveyed, the literature, talked to a bunch of different stakeholders, and released it alongside a workshop that we ran at ICML 2019. And at that workshop, we more broadly, we saw huge reception for the paper. A lot of people kind of at the workshop, lines out the door, wanting to kind of come help in this area, but feeling like they needed help themselves in terms of finding collaborators, finding resources, really learning about the space. And so this is what kind of inspired us to launch Climate Change AI in 2019. And since then, it's grown into this global community, bringing together thousands of people from across academia, industry, the public sector, through our kind of workshops to facilitate the kinds of knowledge exchange that we've talked about, summer schools to provide targeted education, our innovation grants program, and a lot of different kind of resources on our website to help people continue the conversation on a more ongoing basis, as well as find out various kinds of information. And we've also worked with policymakers to try to, again, inform the discourse in a kind of science-informed way as to how AI and machine learning, what their implications are for climate change, both the good and the bad, and how that should inform, for example, national level policymaking in different countries. So it's been really cool to build this initiative, and it's been largely volunteer driven, which is also really cool. It started with a team of 10 volunteers and it's grown to 50, and the volunteers are themselves researchers and practitioners in AI and climate change from around the world. So it's been a really vibrant community, and one that's been really, really awesome to get to help build.
Yeah, thank you so much for this amazing work. I think like this is like extension of the education, also bringing the practitioners into the same discussions on these important matters of climate. And similar question to Ronnie, like you've been interviewing, having the conversation with different funders, especially in NH in Europe. I think like what's your sort of view? How do you compare the community here in Europe and then perhaps other places you've lived and worked, such as China, like people is approaching this climate change issues through startup world?
It feels very different if you directly compare Europe and China, especially among, like, for example, our peers, where you see here in Europe, you see many people, students or young professionals in different industry, very passionate about the topics of finance, like sustainability, climate change, and they actually devote much of their time and work and their future career planning to this field. And in comparison, I think in China there's a relatively less strong, community working on these topics, and people who genuinely believe this is true and they want to come up with some kind of community solution or want to devote much of their precious time to this topic. So I think there's still room for improvements for sure. And another thing, difference that I see is also on the innovation ecosystems. So not just climate change related, but also more general. Over here, for example, people are less constrained, I feel like, especially our peers, about exploring using new, like very high impact new technologies such as machine learning or blockchain or satellites to explore new solutions for our pressing challenges, and it feels not so in other places.
Yeah, if I can just add one more last thing from my experience as an individual and also our startup, I think lots of time it's about the access to information, where like makes education and community such an important component of that. So you don't know what you don't know about. So that is that sort of thing too. My takeaways on this. Yeah, and then so how can people participate in your community work, say like climate change AI, to Priya?
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of climate change AI, I think definitely I would encourage people to, for example, tune into our upcoming iClear workshop, which is in May of 2023. And it's a great place to learn about a lot of the ongoing research, as well as hear talks from some, luminaries in the field. We also have we have a summer school, as mentioned, that will be running over the summer. The virtual component is open to all and will run between June and August. And so I'd encourage people to tune into that if they want to learn more about the space of, where is it that AI can be used for climate action. And then in general, we have, a community platform, these happy hours, various ways to plug in and really take advantage of some of the community that exists there to really learn from others. And so I'd encourage you to check all these things out on the Climate Change AI website.
So final question before we wrap this up. So we want to hear about, we know you're moving to MIT soon, so going and continue in academia and then perhaps more exciting research work coming up. What would you hope for in this year, and especially on the climate change and the AI?
Absolutely, yeah. So yeah, for context here, so I finished my PhD back in August of 2022, and I'm starting at MIT in September 2023. And so over the course of this year, I've been running Climate Change AI full time. And as I mentioned, Climate Change AI has been a fully volunteer-run organization, almost fully volunteer-run to date. And we're definitely looking for funding for the ability to kind of hire more full-time staff, and as a result, kind of grow the footprint of the organization even further. So definitely looking for that as a kind of this ability to really grow and solidify the organization as something that's very important to me before starting. And then when I started at MIT, my research agenda is focused on this idea of trying to help us more dynamically manage power grids to foster the integration of renewables. And so in addition to doing algorithmic work to actually develop kind of, the next generation of algorithms, bridging machine learning and optimization and control to really foster this. As I mentioned, I think a big bottleneck is also the data, the simulation infrastructure, the ways to actually improve the technological readiness of these technologies and actually deploy them on power grids. So I'm very excited to contribute to that aspect as well and think about how do we actually build this underlying infrastructure that allows a large number of people to really innovate and help us push forward on some of the hard problems that we're facing on power grids.
Thank you, and I will be looking forward to hear you for more exciting news. And then Ronnie, what would you be hoping for in this year?
Me personally, I'll be hoping for seeing a lot of new exciting technology coming out, not just ChatGPT, but also more probably in the space of climate change and energy transition. Last year we had fusion. Let's see what kind of technology we have for this year.
Thank you. With that note, I want to give you thanks for both of you joining us today. Thank you so much for listening to Talks at the Climind. We'll see you next episode. We're continually looking for speakers working in the intersection of climate change and AI. Welcome your feedback. Leave a message to us at contact@climind.co. Bye.